What an amazing view. All right, folks, we are live. We have Mr. Kent Masterson Brown with us. Welcome, Kent.
It's good to be here.
Thanks. Had a little technical difficulty, but we're at it and ready to go. So, Kent, I want to do a little intro. I know a lot of people that are watching probably know you very well and know your history and your career, but I'll talk a little bit about it so that maybe if we have one or two that don't know, they'll get to know you.
Sure. Okay.
You've been a constitutional attorney for a long time, correct?
47 years.
There we go.
That's a long time.
You helped form the Perryville Battlefield Association, appointed chairman of the Gettysburg National Military Battlefield Park Advisory Commission. You've written many articles. You've written multiple books, and you've produced several documentaries and hosted those documentaries. One of my favorites was the Unsung Heroes of Horse of the Civil War. And you're a speaker, public figure, volunteer, preservationist, and above all, you're a husband and a father.
Yeah, that's got it.
All right. So we wanted to bring you on here because Meade at Gettysburg is such a refreshing look at General Meade and what he accomplished there at Gettysburg. And I wanted to kind of get your insight on how the things that you did in order to accomplish this work and really how you went about bringing all this to light.
Well, you know, George Meade has interested me for a long time. But I, in reading about him, I kept coming upon this part of every book, it seems, or most books, at least the ones I read, that somehow Meade failed after the battle was over. And he should have somehow moved fast enough to catch up with Lee's army and, quote, destroy him.
Right.
And this is a mirror of what Abraham Lincoln claimed. And it's like everyone knowing that, how do you possibly dispute Abraham Lincoln?
Right.
And I kept seeing this pop up in works about the Gettysburg campaign and about George Meade in particular. And I kept thinking, you know, I wonder if I could get deep enough into him and ignore all this other stuff, just get deep enough into his life. Would that really prove to be the case? Or is there something that everyone seems to miss about George Meade at Gettysburg? Being a lawyer, courtroom lawyer, I learned that there are things that are, there is what you would call best evidence, and there's just evidence, but there's also the best evidence.
Okay.
And the best evidence is the evidence of what the individual under scrutiny said at the time the issue arose, whatever issue it is.
Okay.
And if you don't have words from him, what or her, what did he or she write at the time of that, whatever it is? And with Meade, it's did he pursue Lee and could he have destroyed Lee?
Right.
And so what I decided to do was to not consider any book that has been written for purposes of my work on Meade, and except where I have a difference with that writer, and examine Meade only on the dispatches or letters he wrote at the time.
Okay.
What did he say? What did he order? And that's the sum and substance of what he did, nothing else.
Right.
And so what I was doing was looking at the best evidence. And what came out of that is what you've read and other people have read. And that is a general who brilliantly commanded the army at the Battle of Gettysburg. And I don't think very many people dispute that.
Right.
However, once the battle was over, then all the disputes come in. And once the fighting was over, did Meade pursue with aggression his enemy? Could he have annihilated that enemy, defeated it soundly along the Potomac River at the end of his pursuit or the latter part of his pursuit? And if he did not, what do you think was the reason?
Right.
Well, it turns out that the Army of the Potomac, from the time in which Meade was named commander, June 28, 1863, from the time he was named commander, had not received any supplies of food, of shoes, of clothing, of anything.
Okay.
At the time he was named commander. From the time he was named commander until the pursuit of Lee's army after the battle ended, it had received no supplies whatsoever.
Okay.
Either for the men or for the horses. Now, the numbers are staggering. I mean, nearly 21,000 horses were lost in the Gettysburg campaign.
Right. That's a large number for sure.
Large number. 1,900 of those losses were on the battlefield. Where were the rest from?
Right.
They were broken down. These horses just broke down. And people often ask me, well, Kent, wasn't Lee's army worse supplied than Meade's? That's the old saying, that they were all barefoot and they were not supplied properly and they limped their way back to Virginia. And of course, that is not so. In the book I wrote, Retreat from Gettysburg, Lee Logistics in the Pennsylvania Campaign, I found that Lee's movement into Pennsylvania was for one purpose and one purpose only. And that was to forage that army everywhere and any way he could do it. And for 2 solid weeks before the Battle of Gettysburg began, he was systematically foraging.
Okay.
So by the time Lee actually launched his withdrawal from Pennsylvania, his supply trains were in excess of 56 miles long, filled with purchased, impressed, and confiscated goods, as well as, get this, nearly 20,000 head of cattle and nearly the same amount of head of sheep. So that army was well supplied. I mean, it could actually make it for several months once it got into into Virginia.
Yeah.
And here, on the other hand, George Meade's army has gotten nothing. And some people might say, well, he had a supply line from Gettysburg to Westminster, and that was a supply line from Westminster to Baltimore, and they could have gotten it in there. And the answer to that is, oh, sure, he could have. But the Baltimore Pike from Gettysburg leads to Westminster.
Okay.
And on to Baltimore. That road crosses the summits of Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. And they were under attack the entire time the Army of the Potomac was there.
Right.
And so they could not bring supplies. They would not bring supplies for fear the supply line would be broken by these attacks. And so Meade could not. And his supply officers all told him, we can't because it'll be taken, whatever we bring up here. So they don't have anything while they're at Gettysburg, and they've had nothing up until they got there.
Okay.
So in that sense, you can see immediately the problem. And it's a problem, no one's ever dealt into. No one thought about. Logistics is kind of boring to a lot of people, and they don't really look at it.
Right.
But it is what keeps an army alive.
Yeah, it's a huge part.
It's a huge part. And, and if you can't feed them, you can't fight them, period. You just can't do it. And it's a marvel that the Army of the Potomac stayed intact during that battle and prevailed.
Yeah.
And yet it has this problem, which raises its head when the Army has to make a large move in some direction.
Right.
And in the pursuit of Lee, it is a 64-mile proposition to finally reach a point where he could actually confront Lee. Yeah. And in those 64 miles is where the damage was done to most of these animals.
Yeah.
And when I came across the numbers in the National Archives, the numbers I just gave you are numbers I found in a report issued by the Deputy Quartermaster General of the Army to Montgomery Meigs, the Quartermaster General. And that's where you get the figures of the losses. And that staggered me. I thought, my heavens, how can an army even exist without this and in this sort of shape? And I said, I wonder if I could corroborate. A lawyer has to corroborate evidence, all the time.
Right.
People say, well, that's just his thoughts, So I kept rummaging around, trying to find something that would corroborate what I had just found. And I came across a diary written by a soldier in the 39th Pennsylvania Infantry.
Okay.
And I found it in the Army War College in their archives. And I started looking at it, and I came across the period where he talks about Gettysburg.
Yeah.
And he's writing now in this diary from near in front of the Confederate lines down along the Potomac River. They'd gotten that far.
Okay.
And he's writing on there, and he says first, the men are hungry. Many can't make it, collapse. The horses are blue. Hundreds die every day.
So they're dying of exhaustion and starvation.
Starvation, yeah. And just having nothing.
Yeah.
And that said it for me. I said, well, hell, I rest my case, so to speak, on this.
Yeah.
And I quote him in my book, the Meade book.
Yeah.
And I quote the report of the Quartermaster General, Deputy Quartermaster General, so one can see it for oneself.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's that was the findings. And so you think of what about being George Meade then, and hearing all of this stuff about you should have done this and you should have done that. Sure. Here's a guy who defeated this enemy, the first defeat of that enemy by the Army of the Potomac since the war began almost. And yet this is what he gets.
Yeah.
And it's never stopped.
Yeah.
And I hope this stops it.
Yeah, I think it will, especially. So going into this book, one thing I did notice about it was, like, you could tell almost that a lawyer was setting this book up because there's a timeline
Yeah.
There are written accounts from every single person that's involved, especially the major players, and there's even full explanations to maybe for the layman's term for people that don't understand what exactly was supposed to be happening at this battlefield. For example, at the very beginning, you go through reconnaissance in force, how
Right.
Reynolds and their men were supposed to be reconnoitering where these soldiers were coming from, how many were there, and then the fallback point at Pipe Creek.
That's right.
That seemed to be a very significant turn. And you also you kind of bounce it off of Alan Guelzo's book,
Yeah.
and his thoughts behind all of this.
he when that book came out, I know Alan, and Alan's
Yeah,
a good guy. He's a friend, and I've known him for a long time. But he called me on the phone, and I answered it, and I go, hello, and he goes, this is Alan Guelzo. I go, oh, Alan, how you doing? He says, you've said naughty things about me in Meade. And I thought, well, sorry about that, my friend, but that's the way it goes. But yeah, I mean, he's just one, though. There are lots of them who fall into the same trap and have since the war, since Lincoln made his comments about him.
absolutely.
And I hope we've reckoned. We've set that record straight.
I think with this book definitely you have, and another thing that's coming to light is Sickles' role in all of this as well.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of back and forth talking about whether or not Sickles was in the wrong for doing what he did. I've even read some people say that Sickles saved the entire army from defeat that day because he placed his men on that hill. But if you go through all of the documents that you've written about in here and you see exactly what happened, I mean, realistically, what he did do was he saw what he thought was the right thing to do, and he made a mess for General Meade.
Yeah, he sure did. He sure did. And you bring up also the reconnaissance in force thing.
Yes.
The idea of a reconnaissance in force is as old as military thinking is old in this
Right.
world. And there are great treatises written over the years by Jomini and hosts of others, some European, some American. These were ones who developed a philosophy of war, a mechanism on paper of how you operate in
Yes.
war, and they've been followed consistently through the generations. I mean, they are even today. There are treatises on war, and I befriended some years ago a fellow. He's gone now, but he and I became very close friends. His name was Mac Kaufman, and Mac went to church with us, and he and I got to be really good chums. And he was the professor, get this, of military history at the University of Wisconsin. And he also was a veteran of Korea. And he's the one who, after church, we'd sit and chat, would talk about Jomini and the great military theorists. And he'd throw things at me like, what do you think? And I'd tell him. And I finally learned from him that those military theorists were the ones that all these generals at Gettysburg and elsewhere during the war, those who were West Pointers, studied this. They were drilled in it, just like their previous generations were. And and this was how they functioned. It was how they were instructed to function. And so what I did was I looked at the situation on July 1. And what George Meade orders John Reynolds, who he trusts, and who is, by the way, a very close friend of his, Both of them were commanders of Pennsylvania reserves together in the part of the war before Gettysburg. And he orders him to Gettysburg.
Okay.
But he doesn't order him to do anything else to Gettysburg. And then he tells him, if the enemy appears in front of you in large number, you are to fall back. And when you fall back, I will reinforce you. And so this is your classic reconnaissance and force. He's going to go out, show himself, the Reynolds is, in sizable numbers with artillery and everything else and mounted commands. And he's going to see what the enemy does. And the reason George Meade would want to do that is that he had no idea the precise location of all the elements of the Army of Northern Virginia. And the only way one can find out that sort of information is to force that enemy to congregate somewhere.
Right.
As a result of something you do. And so John Reynolds was not sent there to enter into some engagement. And frankly, I hate to say this, but John Buford wasn't either.
Right.
John Buford was instructed to examine what's out there west of Gettysburg, find out what anything is out there that I need to know about as commander of the army. And that's his mission.
Yeah.
He was given that mission not by George Meade, but by Alfred Pleasonton, his commander of cavalry in the Army of the Potomac. And so why does John Buford get caught in some engagement out there? Right. We all like to make big hay out of it. I had a godfather who wrote his doctoral dissertation on the life of John Buford, and he'd probably spin in his grave knowing that I was saying this about John Buford, because he took it for granted that, like everybody else, he was out there to, engage the enemy, or as the movie Gettysburg shows, find a way to get back to the high ground,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And he wasn't supposed to do any of that.
Yeah.
He was supposed to make sure that the left flank of John Reynolds' command is safe, is protected, and he's to get all the intelligence he can get from what he sees out there, and report it not only to John Reynolds but to the commander of the army. Exactly. And so here, Reynolds gets himself locked in combat. He can't extricate himself from it. John Reynolds then gets up there and comes to his aid. And we all know the rest of the story. Exactly. And it's a story that Meade had no intention of seeing happen. Right. And if someone asked him, he'd say, no, I don't want that to happen. Yeah. And so that's where the Battle of Gettysburg begins. It's just off of just not complying with what they're supposed to do. Right. And then Abner Doubleday's part in all of this too. Really. Yes, exactly. Well, when Reynolds goes down, he becomes the commander, and we all know what happened after that. Right. So yeah, he saved the field about as much as he made baseball. So maybe he ought to stick with baseball, don't you think? Right. Yeah, and at one point you talk about how General Meade approaches the field, and it's dark out, and he's coming out there to talk to his officers. He's assessing the land as best he can, and you paint the picture of him seeing the fires across the field. Yes, a massive amount of fires that are out in the woods. A lot of books, whenever we read about Gettysburg, a lot of books try to paint the back and forth, and they're heavy on the Confederate side. Mm-hmm. But this book deals strictly with the Union Army, and it really takes you through the throes from the beginning to the end to the afterwards, really.
and paints that picture of what it's like standing on that ridgeline to see that land and understand what's important. I
Right.
found it interesting that you say that General Meade did not see that ridgeline as being a good point to be defensible. He
No.
saw Little Round Top, Culp's Hill, and Cemetery Hill,
Right.
but that ridgeline was not part of the plan. It did not
Right.
look like something that was going to be great for him.
Yeah, and his comment up there, as he was looking out over the fields, was that the tough thing we've got to contend with is that we could be turned on our left flank.
Right.
And no matter how nice Cemetery Hill looks, or Culp's Hill, or whatever, that's the truth. You could be turned.
Yeah.
And so that became the thing he most wanted to keep from happening.
Yeah.
And because he was in danger.
Right.
It's interesting. He gets up there, and you have a number of diarists who comment on what he says. But one thing they all kind of agree with is that he wasn't real happy with where the army was being situated.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, we got the high ground now, we can do anything we want.
Right.
He was concerned about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and even so when I went to Gettysburg for the very first time to see the place for myself, that was the first thing I noticed was the ridge itself and how it really did not seem to be that great of a position to be in. Especially in certain points, you can't even see part of the army. You can't even see the line itself. You don't even know where some portions are, and they're moving in concert with each other, and they just disappear.
Yeah.
And I believe you spoke to that also in the book, where General Meade wasn't able to see part of his army.
Right. Yeah. That wasn't he comes over as not being very, very pleased with the situation of the army.
Yeah, and then definitely the lack of preparation. You talked about the lack of preparation when it came to you go in a reconnaissance in force. They started an engagement. They're now not prepared for the men that are dying on the fields. They're not prepared for hospitals. They're not prepared to pull people off the field. And so now we have all these people on these fields, these hot fields, for 2-3 days, sometimes even longer than that.
Oh yeah. That's exactly right. And when Lee's army comes on the field, it comes on the field deliberately.
Yeah.
And as it comes on the field, it sets up division hospitals. They do it by division, and they're all still there today. Division hospitals, they pick out a farm that has a house, which will be the hospital, and they bring all the quartermaster supplies of that division to that site too. So after the division is finishes fighting, it can go withdraw back to that site where its hospital is, where all the supplies are, the wagons filled with all their quartermaster stores and food and so forth, plus beef on the hoof and cattle and sheep on the hoof. All that is back at each division hospital. So it not only is a receiving site for casualties, but it is a site where the troops can return to and be fed.
Right.
And there's nothing like that Meade could have possibly set up, given the situation he found the army in.
Right. And some men on July 2nd even sat down and they had, I think it was coffee and crackers.
Yeah, right.
And it wasn't until 2 to 2.5 days later that they were able to have any subsistence afterwards.
Any food. Yeah. Exactly.
So I have a question from an audience member that was sent in a while back, and they were asking about the other side of the field. Maybe you might be able to bring some historical perspective to this. They said on July 2nd, after Longstreet's attack on the Union left was sent forward, to include Barksdale, it seems no one was sent to support that line afterwards. Why do you suppose it seems like maybe A.P. Hill or someone from the Confederate side wasn't able to support or was not brought up to support that attack?
Well, A.P. Hill's corps was situated in a north of where Longstreet was.
Okay.
And for him to somewhat abandon that line in order to go to the assistance of Longstreet, one would wonder whether that would be dangerous.
Right.
I think it would. I think he thought it would.
Yeah.
And given the situation of the of Lee's army along the Seminary Ridge, that he did not move there was frankly the prudent thing to do.
Yeah.
And I wish I could get into Lee's thinking.
Yeah.
At Gettysburg. That's one of several cases where you wonder, what was he thinking? What was motivating him? Lee was a brilliant commander. He'd shown that throughout the entire war up to Gettysburg. And here is something where one has to step back and ask, why? Why did you do that? Why did you do that? Or why didn't you do this? And I don't know if we have answers to any of that. I don't think we do, and I don't think we ever will.
Right.
But they're interesting questions to raise.
Yeah, definitely. I take a look at a lot of these larger battles too, and I see that generally, for the most part, with the exception of Petersburg, when you're looking at an army that's facing a defensive position versus an army that's facing an offensive position, it really kind of dictates the outcome of the battle, especially depending on the actual position itself and the ground that they're defending.
Right.
It was also said that these soldiers fought harder than they've ever fought before because they were on Pennsylvania ground.
Yeah.
What's your thought on that?
Well, I think they probably did believe they fought harder there than they ever fought anywhere because they had to.
Yeah.
They just had to. How do you otherwise take those positions that the enemy has set up, as distant as they were from you? How do you take those without giving it everything you got?
Yeah.
And I can see how that originated. That sort of understanding that.
And likewise with the forces under General Meade, they certainly fought harder than they probably ever fought before as well. Well, with everything that you've been doing, do you have anything coming up? Another book, perhaps, or speaking engagement or something?
Well, I'm producing a new movie.
Okay.
You know, I have a foundation that raises the capital to make documentary films on American history for public television.
Right.
And you've seen The Horse in the Civil War.
Yes.
And I even put my Retreat from Gettysburg into film.
Yes.
That was some time ago, but before this foundation was formed. But the foundation has produced a terrific film on Abraham Lincoln's life in Illinois. That attracted me because he was a lawyer, and this is his years as a lawyer in Illinois, and the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library uses that film now on a continuous loop out there. They called me up and said, we just started hearing this from people coming in and visiting the library. Could we use that film? And I go, of course you can. That's what we're in the business for. So I sent the film out to Springfield, Illinois, and that's where it is.
Nice.
But we've just recently finished a film called The Shot Heard Round the World on the coming of the American Revolution. And it has just gone gangbusters.
Nice.
It was broadcast, like all our films, on Kentucky Educational Television First, which is our PBS affiliate in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And KET, with this one, as it did with the Lincoln film, it sends those films to the National Educational Telecommunications Association, which is an arm of PBS. And if it likes it, then it will make it available to all 247 PBS affiliates, which is what they have been doing with our films. So we're
Very
really
nice.
proud of that. And
Yeah.
So we're now in the midst of producing a film on the life of Andrew Johnson.
Oh, okay.
Who was the 17th president of the United States. He became president when Lincoln was assassinated.
Right.
He came from Greenville, Tennessee. He was a Jackson Democrat.
Yeah.
Who believed in states' rights. And yet he ran with Lincoln on the Union ticket, not the Republican ticket, but the Union ticket.
Yeah.
In 1864.
Yeah.
And when Lincoln was assassinated, he became president. And his life from there on is absolutely fascinating to me as president. This is the age of the radical Republicans who wanted to go in and punish the southern states, when the war ended. And, Andrew Johnson's partner in politics, Lincoln, for purposes of Lincoln's last years anyway, and Johnson's becoming president. Lincoln kind of set the stage for this by his inaugural address, his second inaugural address,
right?
With malice toward none, with charity for all, firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him shall have borne the battle for his widow and orphan, and do all things that we cherish to bring harmony to ourselves and to all nations. And that's Johnson got that and said, that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to just follow him.
Yeah.
And he's been scorned over the years for it. And a lot of modern academics and writers of his biographies, call him the worst president in American history.
Yeah.
And this man was anything but that.
Right.
And so once again, we're going to revive someone.
Right.
We did for George Meade, and by God, we'll do it for Andrew Johnson.
Well, that's very good. That's very good. Well, we're looking forward to that for sure. And everybody that's watching out there, definitely keep your eyes open and your ears open for that. Those films are outstanding. I highly recommend you go out there and check it out. And if you haven't read Meade at Gettysburg, you're absolutely missing out on a quintessential piece of Gettysburg history. This is one of those pieces of work that will open your mind up to a whole new avenue of thinking. And that's the kind of literature you need. You need something that's going to make you think about things instead of just certify what you already thought you knew. Yeah. So
one thing more I'd like to add,
and
that is that if one goes on our foundation's YouTube channel, you can watch every film we've ever made, including the most recent ones, and it's all for nothing. We want people to see American history.
Very good.
It's Witnessing History Education Foundation YouTube.
All right.
And go on and have a good time.
Good. Well, Kent, I'm going to have you email me that so that I can put that in the description here, and so that anybody that watches this video wants to see that, they can go to the description.
Very good.
Click on the link and go straight to the channel.
Very good. We will. Thank
All
you.
Right.
I've enjoyed it so much.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you coming on, and thanks to everybody for tuning in and watching this, and we'll see you around.
Very good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't think of a better place to end this video Then right here, in the middle of the woods, the Battle of the Wilderness, at the hotly contested Brocken Plank Road, Orange Plank Road. Not too far in that direction, Longstreet's wounded. Right here where I'm at right now is a place where men like Wadsworth and Hayes end up losing their lives. Families lose loved ones. Soldiers burn to death in these fields around me here. If you'll let these fields do it, they'll touch your soul.